Hey, folks, welcome back to the Utah County Republican Party podcast. I keep realizing what a mouthful that is, but that's who we are.
Gotta get a tighter name.
Right? Yeah. UCRPP? I don't know. Anyway, we're here with Kirby Glad and John Dougall. Kirby is currently the secretary for the Utah County Republican Party, and he's held various other positions within the party, and so we're happy to have him here. We also have John Dougall. John is currently the Utah State Auditor. He also recently ran for Congress in Congressional District 3 for Utah. And he was giving us a whole bunch of backstory on where he came from. But for this audience, I think it's probably most relevant that you were in the legislature for a while before you were the state auditor. And so you've come through, we're talking about the caucus system. You know, you've come through this process a bunch of times. And so
about 24 years, yes.
Yeah. And so anyway, I'm excited to jump in and kind of see where both of you come from on this discussion, since I know that there's a bit of difference of opinion in certain areas. Just to kind of kick us off, why don't each of you just tell us really briefly what your experience has been with the caucus system, whether it's been as a candidate or helping run it or what have you?
I just want to make a disclaimer. I can see that I've got the logo of the Utah County Republican Party like above my picture here. I'm not here to speak for the Republican Party. That's the job of the chair, but
Fair. I'm
here as an active member of the party to have a good discussion with John.
Yeah, that's the way I set up the layout. It just puts it in that corner. So.
Yeah, I know. It was not intentional, but I just want to make that clear. That's what I'm about. I'll defer to you, John, if you want to give your.
Okay, well, as I mentioned, I was in the House for a decade. I've served as auditor for 12 years. I've been through the caucus convention system for about 24 years now, and I've seen what I would call the highs and the lows, and so I'm one of those that back when we had Keep My Voice, I was helping them further the caucus convention system. But I think right now we also recognize we need to recognize there are some weaknesses in the system, and if we want to preserve it, we got to figure out how to fix it. So, and I think we'll be discussing that today.
I think that might be a topic. I've been involved with the Utah County Party for a number of years, a couple decades, maybe as long as John's been in politics. I've run for office a few times, but never went through the convention system because it was a nonpartisan race. But I've been a very active participant and an observer of the caucus system for a long time. So I'm very interested in preserving it because I believe it provides some important advantages that we need, and I also believe that it can always be improved. So and I just have to say how much I appreciate and respect John. I've been a fan of John's political career, and voted for him at many conventions, and really respect what he has brought to the Utah government. So thanks, John, for letting us have this chat.
Well, thank you so much, and look forward to it. Where do you want to lead off?
So I know that one thing you mentioned as we were discussing this in advance is who do the delegates represent, and what is the an engagement?
What is the purpose of the caucus convention?
Yeah,
let's start
that's
there.
good. I think that's a perfect place to start, and lead off. What do you see as the purpose of the caucus system?
Well, from my perspective, it's really to vet the candidates to determine which one will best represent the party. Now, when you think about that, we're usually talking about the one or two candidates. And this is not like a prediction poll. This is not, here's what your neighbors will vote for, or anything like that. But the delegates are supposed to, from my perspective, really vet the candidates. And they're supposed to be trying to see how well do they line up with the party platform, and how effective do we think they will be in pursuing the objectives of the Republican Party. So that's kind of where I come from. I think you disconnect. So go ahead.
No, I don't think we have a disconnect. I think you've hit several things that are very important. I believe that there's a misconception in the public and even some legislators who have commented that it's supposed to be a prediction poll. and it's not at all. So and I do agree that part of the purpose of the caucus is through the convention process to vet candidates. And a lot of people don't understand that there's a wider purpose of the caucus. The caucus is also how we determine the leadership of the party. So the candidates, the delegates, don't only vote on who the nominees of the party should be, they also set the policy of the party. They determine what the platform will be. They elect the leaders of the party. They set the budget of the party. So the party is not just everyone in Utah who signs up as a Republican, registers as a Republican, or even a lot of unaffiliated, who is the largest largest political party in Utah, at least in Utah County, is unaffiliated. So there are people who have Republican leanings but don't register Republican, and but the party is a corporation. We're an organization like the Lions Club or the or 4-H, or we take in money, we spend money, and we need leadership for that, and those delegates also provide that.
So when I talk about the candidates, or I mean the delegates, vetting candidates, trying to see who best represents the party. I mean, you talked some about the party, but who is the party? Is the party the delegates and what they think, or is the party the broader electorate of Republicans in the state?
I think that is a pivotal question, because again, I think it's also a misunderstanding. So I've heard it said on chats and whatnot that the purpose of the caucus is to represent all Republicans. And I just illustrated that the Republicans is a wide group, including people who think of themselves as Republican, but they're actually registered as unaffiliated or even libertarian, but they quite often vote Republican. And I think there's a very simple and clear answer to this that can't be argued, but we'll see. And that is, you represent your electorate. So when you were a representative, which you were for 10 years in our legislature and did an amazing job.
Representing Northeast Utah County, so Alpine, Highland, 2/3 American Fork, a little bit of Lehigh, a little bit of Draper, to let folks have the context of where I represent.
Absolutely. Now, did you represent all people in that area?
Yes.
Or did you represent the voting electorate in that area?
Well, in theory, I was representing all people in that area.
Representing the interests of all people in that area.
Yes.
But you can only ever claim to represent the people who are involved in the process of selecting you. That's really all you can prove. Like if there's a silent majority of people who never go to the polls, you represent their interests because that's the purpose of government. But you can't really guarantee that you represent those people because they didn't vote for you. Or they don't even take the opportunity to vote for you. Does that make any sense? That's my
a little bit. I mean, the other thing is, let's suppose you and Chuck both vote for me.
Yeah.
But you have different beliefs on a certain issue.
Yes.
Part of the job of a representative is to navigate and balance those different interests. There's going to be times where your interests align and times when your interests don't align. And part of what my job is to balance that out.
I think that's exactly true.
The short-term interest, but also trying to look at the long-term interest and really dive in depth. Part of the reason we elect representatives is because, when I served in the House, I mean, it was like a full-time job, 6 a.m. till midnight every day, 6 days a week. And that was, 6.5, 7 weeks during the session. And then, about 30 hours a week outside of session during what we call the interim. That's a lot of time. And most people don't have that much time to put forth studying issues. And so that's why they elect representatives, to try and dig in depth and study those issues. And there's times where I voted along with what my constituents wanted, even though it was against what I personally wanted, because I felt like they really understood that issue. There are other times where I probably voted against their interests, but what I thought were their long-term interests, because I felt like I had more information to help them on that process.
And I believe that the responsibility of our elected officials is to make the same decisions that by and large their constituency would make if they had the same information.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So now
one of the challenges there, Kirby, is I used to think, if you and I would look at the same information, we come to the same conclusion.
Yes, that's never true. I used to think the same thing.
Because we also filter it based on our experiences.
Absolutely true.
And we're trying to predict the future. And Yogi Berra said predictions are hard, especially about the future.
Yeah, especially about the future. So do you feel that our elected representatives in the House or the Senate or at the federal level, are they more intelligent or more right or more pure Republicans than the people who elect them? Or just they have more information, they're more engaged, they have more time to dig into the issues?
In theory, they have more time to dig into the issues.
I think that's exactly right.
Just
So
because they have that doesn't mean they're better informed.
also true.
But yeah.
Because what I've observed is across all of humanity, there is a sliding scale of engagement. So there's some elected representatives who work very hard, they're very knowledgeable, and there's some who phone it in.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Just like the electorate. Some work very hard, they're very engaged in the process, and some of them really don't care about politics and may even never vote.
Well, and this is one of those things, and this isn't my concept. I get it from an economist, but he describes that voting is irrational. And what he means by that is think about the last time that your single vote made a difference.
Yeah.
And it rarely happens.
That's true.
But think about the amount of time it takes to be really informed on issues. I was talking with somebody and they said it probably takes about at least a half an hour a day. So ask yourself, a half an hour a day for 365 days, that's
right.
a lot of time.
That's right.
For an outcome that you're not going to change.
Exactly.
And so therefore, that's what he means by irrational, but we still need to do it.
Very true. So I think what we've just made is the case for the importance of the caucus and convention system, because it is not the fact that the delegates are more important or smarter or better looking than, although I like to think so, than the people who are members of the party. Yeah, you look marvelous. But they're simply more engaged. They simply take the time to vet the candidates.
You hope, in theory, this is when it works versus.
And I know you have some concerns about that. Let me get to that in a second. But I think there's an important distinction of what we've just been talking about. 2 points I'd like to make. First of all, you only represent you only know that you represent the people who have voted for you, because maybe there's people who didn't vote and they would have voted you out. Maybe they would have voted for somebody else. So you only know that you represent the people that you vote for you. So I think that applies to the caucus system as well. The delegates represent the people who show up to caucus. That's who they represent. If they're trying to represent the entire Republican constituency, we would just have a primary, right? Now, the reason that the delegates are different than your faithful and excellent service as an elected representative is your job is to compromise. Your job is to determine what's best for everyone. Your job is to really, because the government can kill you and take your things away, you have to be very careful that you're doing what's best for everybody. That's not the function of the delegates. We don't represent people.
Thank goodness the delegates aren't trying to kill me and take
exactly. Yes, yeah, that would be bad. That would be a whole different kind of primary process. Yeah. So the delegates are not trying to represent people. The delegates are representing the platform. We advocate for a position. We help to set the goalposts of the political process. We're not in the business of compromise. We're not in the business of trying to figure out, well, this is we're willing to give on this. We have a platform, and that's what we're there to advocate for. It's the job of the representatives to say, well, here's a principle in the platform, and how to apply that to all these different interests. We only have one interest as a party, and that's the platform, and that's what we advocate for. Does that make any sense?
Right. I think so. So before I go answer that, I just want to make sure folks are clear. One of the reasons why historically I've supported the caucus convention system is I moved here from California, and out there it looked like wealth and fame determine the outcome of elections. And the caucus convention system, when it works well, can empower those that have good ideas, but don't necessarily have wealth and fame to make their case of why they should be elected or whatever the case might be. So when you say the job of the delegates is to represent the platform, let me ask a question here. What happens, and we've seen this in various elections along the way, when the general Republican electorate, and when I say general electorate, in this case, I'm meaning the Republican electorate.
Okay, the primary voters.
The primary voters. What happens when there's a disconnect between, if you will, who the delegates are recommending or nominating versus the general electorate of the primary.
Of the primary voters.
Yeah.
So that is a fantastic question, and I'm so glad that you asked it. And I say when that happens, when the convention nominees nominate someone who isn't then elected at the primary, I say the system is working. That's perfect. Because it's not a prediction poll, as you said in your opening statement. It's not meant to always be in harmony. The purpose of the caucus of the convention is to influence the primary, not to predict the primary, not to rubber stamp the primary. It's to drag people and elected officials towards the principles of the platform.
Okay, so let me restate and dive in a little bit more. So let me pick two candidates, candidate A and candidate B. One gets 59% in convention, the other gets 41%. Yeah, we're not predicting the general electorate's going to pick them 59-41. We're just saying those two need to go off to a primary for the voters to decide because they're too close for us to really pick who we think is best.
Yeah.
If we get something that's 80-20, historically we've been saying, okay, the one with 80% we think really represents the party and can do a good job.
So go ahead.
And so that's kind of that decision. But when, let me pick with the situation that we have today, when the delegates pick somebody with like 70% support and the electorate picks somebody else who got 20% or 30% in convention, and it radically changes the outcome.
Yeah.
What happens is the general electorate says the system doesn't work.
And the general electorate is wrong.
Why are they wrong?
Because you're assuming that the primary is the correct one, and so if it doesn't match up with a convention, that the convention must be wrong. So let's look at.
I'm gonna disagree with you there because
I love it.
If you step back, if the Republican Party is the members of the Republican Party, and they're deciding a certain outcome, and delegates are running down a different path, we've got a disconnect. And there's going to be a time, as a representative, I used to talk about the concept of an end of leash experience, meaning if you voted contrary to your constituents too many times,
you get past the end of your leash. I like it.
You end up either getting voted out of office or subject to a referendum where they undo something the legislature did. You can't get too far away from your electorate or else there's a consequence. Yeah. And so what I'm describing is if the delegates get too far away from the Republican primary voters, they end up with an end of leash experience because the general Republican members are dissatisfied with the process.
Well, and what you say is true. We are effective as a political party only in our ability to attract people to our point of view. So when Alvin Bove in 1854 came up with the idea of a new political party, and he went and he gathered people together in Ripon and said, guys, he got some leaders of other political parties together to form the Republican Party, which they didn't know what to call it at the time. But when he said, gentlemen, I have an idea for a new political party, they did not ask him, who do you represent? They asked him, what do you represent? When people are going door to door gathering signatures to get on the ballot, according to our new system, people who are intelligent about signing petitions, which is very few, they should be asking, well, what does your candidate represent? Not who do you represent? So that was the beginning of the Republican Party, which started out as an anti-slavery party. So that's why I say we don't necessarily represent people. We represent ideas, and then we attract the voters to those ideas. Now, the circular part of this is that the delegates who are elected by our grassroots active Republicans also set the platform. So that's the check and the balance. But we don't make an effort to represent the opinions of people who don't have opinions, like people who don't show up and they're not participant in every organization, whether it's a political organization or a church or 4-H or or the Chamber of Commerce. The organization represents the values of the people who are active, who show up. Those are the people who run the organization. Now, I like what you said about money and fame, because that is the caucus system's purpose.
Because you've got both.
Yeah, yeah. So the caucus system is meant to be a counterbalance against money and fame. So I think that there's a bit of a simplification, John, in the purpose or the vetting process that you've suggested, because I think there's also strategy. So in the years before 2014, before we had the signature path to the ballot, then the purpose of the convention was really to pick, okay, who's the one or two people that really represent the platform. But now we have this whole other thing, which is signature candidates, and that's competition for our party, because everybody who says they're Republican doesn't necessarily reflect the platform. So I believe there are times now, as our process has evolved, that there's also a bit of cleverness about how we. So let's say that there's a very popular candidate who has money and fame, and they're going the signature route. We know that they're going to be on the ballot. Then maybe we should really focus on nominating, getting our party behind another person who doesn't have wealth and fame, and so they can be in the primary, and we can support that person against the wealth and fame, so that the electorate has a choice. So I think you can see that in the Cox campaign, for example. Now, Cox outspent his opponent 2-1. 2-1. Cox spent $2 million on his campaign. Lyman spent $1 million, and yet they were pretty close, not in political terms, but in statistical terms. They were pretty close, or almost 50-50 as to how they voted. So Cox had to spend a lot more money to get money per vote earned. Let's look at John Curtis. John Curtis spent 2.5 times his opponent, and let's agree that he was already the famous one, going into that process. And but you only got 48% of the vote. So the purpose of the caucus and convention system is to counterbalance money and fame, but sometimes money and fame still wins, despite our best efforts.
Yeah. So let's step back. I mean, first thing I want to mention is some people think SB 54, the signature path to the ballot, is the problem, and I would suggest that it's a symptom of the problem.
I agree.
The problem was before, various folks in the general Republican electorate felt like the caucus convention system was not representing them, and they wanted a different avenue. Okay. Yes. And because there was that disconnect, they had the ability to go do something else. The second thing was, and I was warning folks way back long before SB 54 was anybody's thought, was that the party is too beholden to the legislature, meaning it gets subsidized directly with something we call check a buck. Okay, a direct taxpayer subsidy. When you check that box on your tax form,
a voluntary check taxpayer subsidy.
Yeah. Well, it's voluntary on the part of you check the box.
The taxpayer, yeah.
But you compelled me. It's not your money that went there. It was everybody's tax money that went
also
there.
True. I'll take your point on that.
So then it's a direct taxpayer subsidy. They expect the taxpayers to pay for the primary. They expect the taxpayers to pay for maintaining the membership rolls, the county clerks, and they expect an R or D or whatever other party symbol on the general election ballot. So all of these are subsidies to the party, either directly or indirectly. As a result of that, it now says the taxpayers feel like they're paying for it, and they are, and the legislature feels like they can control the party. And so each of those are hooks that the legislature has in the party.
Yes.
And so SB 54 is the symptom of the problems of being disconnected from your Republican membership.
Yes.
And subsidies from the taxpayer.
I knew I was going to love this discussion, John, because we agree so much more than we disagree. And I think you're spot on. SB 54 is not the problem. The party is the problem. And so the 2 points I want to make there is, first of all, the reason why SB 54 came about is because people with money and fame were fighting against the caucus system. We look at now, who are the people who are complaining most about the caucus system? It's the people with a huge amount of money in their political war chest, and they have name recognition. I mean, we could go back to Senator Bennett, who had more money than Carter has liver pills, had come from a political family, and he just assumed that he was entitled to re-election as a U.S. senator. And we can probably spend an hour discussing that race. But the principle that we're trying to counterbalance wealth and fame means that people with wealth and fame will oppose that process. Now, how did we get SB 54? It was because we as a political party, we were lazy. We did not do our job. We had a monopoly. We did not have competition. And competition always makes you stronger in every case. And so now...
The battery kills you.
That's right. Yeah, one or the other. Yes. Yeah. So we, at that time, for decades, all we did is we would go to the convention, we would nominate our candidates, and then we would forget about it. Fire and forget, kind of a missile. We would not lift a finger to help those people really get elected, maybe a little bit in the general election. Now, because of SB 54, it's introduced this competitive element in the primaries, which is that now we have our nominees, but there are other people who can get on the ballot as nominees through a different path. And so you might know, John, because of you've been on the Central Committee for forever, that our bylaws in the past
11 and a half years.
Prevented us. Well, did you know you're a member of the Central Committee now as a state elected representative? Yes.
Yeah.
And even but our bylaws prevented us from taking a stand behind one Republican over another in the primary process. And so we weren't involved in the primary. We never were involved in the primary. We intentionally stayed out of it. Well, now we're realizing that the field has changed. The game has changed. The rules have changed. And for us to be an effective party in advocating for our platform, we have to get involved in the primary. And so we've actually changed our bylaws, and this is why you saw the Republican Party in the state and Utah County and other counties coming out and say, these are the candidates on the primary ballot that have our endorsement. These are the ones that really represent us and that we as delegates fall behind. So you're right. I'm not here to make a case for eliminating SB 54. I remember how we got SB 54 and how it actually saved the convention system at that time.
Right. Let me flag one other thing. You talked about being lazy. And you're absolutely correct with the party being lazy. The other thing I would say is, unfortunately, the process that we have disenfranchises folks. And let me give the example. In the legislature, early on, you learn a rule called 38, 15, and 1. If you don't have 38 votes, meaning the majority of the House, 15 votes, meaning the majority of the Senate, plus the governor on board, you're not going to get that bill passed.
Yep.
Okay? That's the first hurdle you got to clear. So you have a process. No matter how mad you are at somebody, Kirby, let's suppose you and I battle over issue after issue after issue. We're on opposite sides of so many issues. I still make...
If we were, we're not saying that that's true. Yeah.
It's a hypothetical.
Yeah, hypothetical.
But I may need your vote, and you may need my vote. So the legislative process punishes people that burn bridges. Because if you burn too many bridges, you won't have support for trying to accomplish what you need to accomplish. And I tell folks, you even have to run a bill. If you want to cut taxes and deregulate, you got to run a bill to do that.
Right.
So you need to get 38, 15, and 1 on board to make things happen or to undo things that you don't like. Unfortunately, in our process, and this can be in caucus night, this can be at convention, this can be in the SEC, we reward disenfranchisement. If I make it so painful and so discouraging and I push people away, rather than having hundreds of people showing up at my caucus night, I may only have 5. And if you make it so painful, and there are some caucus meetings that are described as going on 4 and 5 hours, where the reasonable person says, I got to get the kids to bed, they got school tomorrow, I leave, then whoever's the holdout gets to control the outcome. If they're at your precinct, at your caucus meeting, you had to really engage. Let's suppose everything had to pass with a majority of the Republicans in your community right there in your precinct. We'd have a very different outcome, and we'd figure out how to engage. On the SEC, if every vote required a majority, not of those in attendance, but a majority of all SEC members, we'd figure out how to get SEC members at the meetings, and we'd figure out how to make stuff happen as a result of that. It would change the outcome.
So I think you're getting to engagement, which is another topic that I know we want to discuss. So I believe that fundamentally you're correct. I believe that.
Chuck, put that down on the calendar. July 23rd. Kirby said I was correct.
Well, I think that, and I've been involved at the steering committee level of the party for many cycles. And we are always looking for ways of making the caucus more convenient, easier, more exciting, more interesting. And it's always a challenge. As you know, there's about 4,000 precincts across the state, and they're all staffed by volunteers. And so there's a logistical problem in getting everyone to do exactly what you said. Now, I'm a precinct chair, and the reason I've been elected as a precinct chair for 20 years is because my meetings never last more than 2 hours. Okay. So, we're trying to teach people how to do that. But I think what you're talking about is not intentional. You're not, but it's a matter of training and people having the right attitude about how to run a caucus meeting. And I agree that there's always a problem about that. But let's always ask, in politics, we always have to say, compared to what? So we know that delegates have a certain level of engagement.
And I'm just saying, look at what the rewards are. And do we reward engagement or do we punish engagement? That's my question.
And you might know I'm a professional parliamentarian, and I have heard of atrocious precinct meetings, that basically were railroading through particular candidates. I'm totally against that. That is not how it should be. I also think it's a very small percentage of people's experience. Other counties had a lot more technical problems this cycle. I think you'll find that in Utah County, things went pretty smoothly. We didn't have the long lines and people getting discouraged, and because basically we have a paper backup system to technology. You're a technologist, never trust the technology. But let's go back to the engagement idea. So we do know that delegates, however they're elected, they are highly engaged. 91% of our delegates said that they had
I wouldn't make that assumption.
Well, I'm not making an assumption. I'm going to give you statistics. So we did a survey of our delegates, and 91% said that they had a direct conversation with the candidate before they voted at the convention. What percentage of the electorate does that? Now, is there any way to deny that a delegate is much more engaged in the process than somebody that you go to their door and say, would you please sign my petition? That takes no engagement whatsoever. So the process of engagement and the average, we asked our delegates how many hours on average did they spend. It was about 60 hours over the course of 2 months, combined of talking to candidates, going to debates, going to meet the candidate events. And I know that you had a different experience, so I want to give you a chance to talk about that. But I'm not making an assumption. This is a measured survey result of the engagement of our delegates. And if you look at even just the simple thing of the meetings, the convention, the number of people who stayed, how long, this has been a very engaged group. I know that you want to talk about that.
Yeah. So I guess I would say that this year was the worst participation from delegates that I have ever seen. And as I said, I've been involved with this in 24 years, and I've seen where, I've been able to sit with delegates for a half an hour to an hour or longer to really get in depth on policy issues. And I don't know if it was because we had 27 or more candidates in the various races.
Yeah.
The delegates felt overwhelmed. I don't know what the factors were, but I had delegates. I had one delegate tell me, I know in the first 15 seconds whether or not I'm voting for a candidate. 15 seconds. The first 15 seconds, they've got their answer. That is not engagement. I had other folks who they gave you 1 minute to vet. So did they talk to you? Yes, technically, yes. 1 minute. That was it. Just give me your elevator pitch, 30-second elevator pitch, and that was it. There were others that clearly spent, significant amount of time. But from those, I don't think in my race, I don't think a candidate held more events than I did. And I think I only reached about 40%. Town hall meetings, phone calls, whatever it was, I reached 40%, I think. It was my estimate. And like I said, I even counted those that were 15 seconds or a minute as part of that 40%.
Right.
And so this was the worst engagement I have ever seen. And so that was, and I don't know what the factors were. I don't know what it was. And then the other thing is you talked about platform. I'd love to get back to that, but I would love for people to be vetting me based on the platform. And unfortunately, I would suggest that most of the delegates have no clue what our platform says. So this election, there were like one or two or maybe three questions that most of those that were asking questions cared about. I would suggest one of the key questions was loyalty to Trump. That was the litmus test for so many delegates. And I don't see loyalty to a president in our platform.
Yeah.
That was the question.
So I have to agree with you there that as a party, we should be loyal to principles and not to a particular candidate, not to a particular person. So I think, I'm going to ask some questions which may be pointed, or make some observations which may be pointed about your experience. So I think that one of the things that
let me flag one other thing, Kirby.
Yes.
Going back to the size of caucus meetings, I've seen caucus meetings where 10 folks showed up.
Yes.
And I've seen caucus meetings where 300 or more showed up.
Likewise.
So I've seen that spectrum of small engagement and major engagement.
Same. Yeah, absolutely. So regarding your race, and I don't know what the factors were, because we can never say, well, the delegates thought this or this or this. So there's just too many people, they represent. And of course, as we pointed out, delegates have a sliding scale of engagement, just like everybody else. Like some delegates are, as you pointed out, and some are a little bit lazy about it. But I know that one of the things that delegates take into account that may have affected your race is we're sort of the term limitations process, right? You've been in government 20 years, and some people might have just, because people know you. You did a fantastic job as our state auditor. And by the way, I'll just point out that I think you were one of the shining stars of the caucus process, the convention process, because in 2012, you stood up running against an incumbent who was a CPA who was saying, you can't be an auditor if you're not a CPA. And you stood up and said, it's not just about, the piles of beans. It's about how you can creatively look at it's about
leadership.
It's about leadership. And we bought into that. We as the delegates bought into that and put you on the ballot for state auditor. So I think you're an example of the process really working. And you've been a fantastic state auditor, but you have had some kerfuffles. Right, you've had some things that, especially regarding, and I don't remember the details of it. You probably do, and I don't want to really get into it.
Oh, I have not been a quiet representative, nor have I been a quiet auditor.
The one thing that Romney said that I really
friends come and go, enemies accumulate.
Exactly, yeah. I think the one thing that Romney said I really agree with is if nobody's booing you, then you're not working very hard in politics. So, so I think there are some other factors, and let's be honest. In the primary, you came in dead last, right? And so there's something about your candidacy in this particular cycle which didn't appeal to the voters or to the delegates. And in this case, the delegates reflected the will of the voters pretty well. So I can't really speak of, but I think you do raise an important point. And let me tell you what we're doing in the party to increase engagement, because I think it is a very.
And Kirby, I'm all for people saying we don't want you, we don't like what you're pitching.
Sure,
but engage.
I'm with you. I'm with you. So here's what we did, which has been different than any other time in the past. So as I've mentioned, we have changed our bylaws that allow us to engage earlier in the primary, and we also passed through the Central Committee, which for people who are listening is the governing body of the Republican Party. We basically passed a job description. For the first time ever, we produced a document that said, this is what we expect delegates to do. We expect you to keep an open mind and not be predetermined for a particular candidate. We expect you to go to debates. We expect you to take phone calls. We expect you to take emails. We expect you to do this. We expect you to go to the convention. We expect you to go to Central Committee meetings. And we asked every single person who was elected as a delegate to sign that commitment. So we have, for the first time, we have codified, which used to be a very amorphous job. Okay, you're a delegate, and we would give you some training and try to tell you how to do it right. But we have never said, this is your responsibility of engagement. This is what we expect of you for engagement. So we have that document, and we have noticed a significant response to that in people now realizing, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is my job. And then we have also, and I forgot my other point because I'm too old. So I don't know if you ever have that happen, but so we're working very hard to increase the level of engagement, and through this delegate agreement and the platform that you mentioned is. The platform is the first thing on the agenda in every precinct caucus. Reading the agenda is a required step because that's the purpose of the caucus, is to find people who will represent the platform. So so there may be precincts that didn't do that, but the statement that a lot of the delegates have never read the platform, well, they should have read it at least one time because that was on caucus night.
Yeah, what I said is most probably don't know what's in the platform.
That could be true. I'll take that point. Yeah, I'll take that point. Everybody doesn't read it every day like I do. I have it on I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So, and I'll just give you a couple anecdotal things. I mean, one, when you have a delegate show up at, let's say, state convention, and they don't know what congressional district they're in,
yeah,
we're trying to say they're more informed. I'm sorry, you're not even clearing the minimum hurdle if you don't even know what congressional district you're in, and you're supposed to be vetting a congressional.
And that's very fair. A lot of them would maybe know the name more than the number. I think we have that at the county convention as well, because we have people check in according to what legislative district they're in, and they don't always know the number. But if we say, who's your representative? Oh, Grecius. Okay, you're in this one.
Yeah. So I just want us to be cautious, because I think we portray this notion of delegates are highly informed and the electorate is uninformed. And I would say delegates may be nominally more informed than voters, but there's a whole spectrum of knowledge and engagement of those delegates. And for us to carte blanche assume that they're all well informed undercuts the credibility of what we're trying to say.
And I think it's true that, like we've said, there's a sliding scale, both of voters as well as delegates. And our goal as a party is, I believe that, and I really support what you're saying here, our goal as a party is to increase the level of engagement.
Right.
Our goal is to try and filter out. And this is one of the reasons why at the precinct meetings, this delegate agreement was read in advance of the election.
Yeah.
To say, this is what you're signing up for. This is what you're promising to do. If you can't do this, then let someone else, be a delegate. That's a first step towards that.
Yes. And I get that. So let me tell you the interesting thing as a candidate on the other side. So the state party said, we'll get you the information about delegates in a couple days. Okay. It was, I think, 10 days before I got the first tranche of delegate information. It was about 3.5 weeks before I got most of it. And even a week before state convention, I was still missing mailing addresses for, what was it? It was a few hundred folks. So when you look and say there's a little over 1,000 delegates, you got a few hundred, you're still missing mailing addresses.
Yeah.
Others you didn't. So it's one of these things. It's like, that's very hard from a candidate perspective for these delegates that say that they're going to be engaged, and you're missing a phone number, you're missing an email, you're missing street address, you can't mail anything to them. It's like, okay, these ones are not highly engaged in that sense.
Absolutely true. I think of course we want to support the interaction between candidates and delegates. That's our job as a party, right? To allow that interaction to take place. That's what we're working towards. As a technologist, you know that all technology doesn't work out the first time. I can only blow our horn. In Utah County, we had the bulk of the delegates available within a week. And then I think another week there was some follow-on. So because you were a statewide candidate, you were looking for a list of 4,000 state delegates. And I know you had a different experience.
Yeah, congressional, I was looking for about 1,000, but yes.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Thanks.
The other thing that was interesting is we had some information from state party and some information from counties that didn't jive on who the delegates were.
Yeah.
And so there were, so it was it's kind of this messy process.
Yeah, I do totally agree. I agree there are issues there. Yes.
So let me ask you a question. Let's go back to the fundamentals.
Yes, please.
We had, what was the turnout? I think the turnout I saw statewide for caucus night was something like 8 or 9% of Republicans showed up at caucus night.
Yeah.
Is that about the number that you
That's
heard?
about right. Yeah.
Okay.
9-ish.
Okay. So to what extent do we as a party have a duty to figure out how to better engage those? I mean, I'm sure there's many reasons why people didn't show up.
Yeah.
I knew folks who leaned differently.
Yeah.
And so therefore they felt like they would be ostracized. They're Republicans, they've been Republicans their whole life, but they feel like they were going to be ostracized going.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, you need to go, you need to have your voice heard, because there's people that believe different things in our party. We're supposed to be a big
Right.
team. So if you're not there, your perspective isn't heard, to your point earlier. So to what extent do we as a party have an obligation to figure out how to help engage folks in the process?
Yeah.
And then I'll give another question. I had somebody, and he does security, so he could not show up at caucus night because of work obligations. He wanted to vote absentee. So for him, voting for president was straightforward. But when it came to voting for precinct chair, vice chair, or delegates, he didn't know who they were.
Yes.
So he didn't have any ability to vote.
That's exactly right. So
and then I was told some folks, we allow this absentee voting, but some precincts, I was told, turned it into proxy voting. So even though people hadn't voted for something, all of a sudden somebody had this proxy to vote 20 votes on behalf of it,
that's
and
not
that
the right way.
falls apart.
So I think you make a very good point. And as you recall, the Count My Vote movement, a decade ago, there were some things that the party agreed to do as a negotiated solution that allowed SB 54 to exist. And one of their complaints, which, by the way, I'll say that the Count My Vote people were a bunch of politicians who had wealth and fame. So I go back to my basic premise that the people who have campaign money and name recognition will fight the caucus system. Nevertheless, sometimes they're right. They can be right. And they were right about the point that you just made, which is, how are we including or excluding? So I think there are some systemic issues within our party that I'm trying to fix as a member of the State Central Committee and change some of our processes. But if you remember, in 2014, we had a system where you could go online in each precinct and file a candidacy, just like fighting for office. And you could say, I'm running for delegate, and anybody in the precinct could go online and see who was running and see their statement as to this is what I believe, as these are my values as a delegate. And then they could cast their absentee ballot based upon that information. I agree with you that it makes no sense to have an absentee ballot system if people can't know who's running, and it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I think you're exactly correct on that point. The absentee ballot is also meant to address the issue that you mentioned of your friend who works security and couldn't get that line off. There should be a good absentee ballot system. I agree with that completely. How do we then, or what is our responsibility to get people involved? I think our responsibility is to invite. It's just like the vote, okay? Only about 30% of the registered Republicans showed up to vote in the primary. And the 70% that didn't vote, that's their right. And if they don't want to participate, and if they don't want to get engaged, then frankly, I'd rather not have them vote. That's fine. So I don't think that our purpose is to just get numbers there of people who are uninformed and don't know what's going on. I think there is a self-selection process of people who are engaged and want to go. But I think where we fall down as a party and where we need to improve is we need to do a better job of informing and inviting. Now, in the decades before SB 54, we never explained to anybody what is the purpose or the advantages of the caucus and convention system. That's why they were ready to sign a referendum to eliminate it. So we have to do a much better job of educating our electorate as to what's the importance of the caucus and convention system, and to invite them to the meeting and then make the meeting a pleasant experience so they don't, they're not afraid of it. So what I do as a precinct chair is I put a flyer on every door in the precinct twice, one in January and one before March, that explains in a half a page, here's what we do at this thing. And if you have more questions, give me a call. I'll chat about it. And this is where it is. Now, I think if every precinct chair was doing that, then, the precinct chairs are where the rubber hits the road in the party process. I think if every precinct chair was doing that, I think that you would, by and large, have a more representative group. I think it is good to have a good cross section of leanings at those caucuses. And I know that some people say, well, only the wild-eyed liberal, not liberals, the opposite of liberals, the wild-eyed right-wingers show up at the meeting. That's not true. We had in our precinct, because we do make an effort to get people out, people who are engaged regardless of where they are on the political spectrum. Somebody who wasn't even able to attend, he was out of town on business, and he sent a letter. You know how hard it is to get elected at those things if you're not there to speak for yourself. He sent a letter and had somebody read it for him and says, look, I'm a moderate. I just want to, I believe in the platform, but I'm not, far right wing. And he got elected. So I don't believe that our precincts only produce these far right wing representatives.
No, what it tends to produce is those that are most passionate about engaging. So
engaged, yes.
So and in sometimes that means you're engaged for a certain individual, a certain, candidate. Sometimes you're engaged about other issues. But that's one of the things I'm just trying to flag. We need to, those that support the caucus convention system, we need to step back and recognize there are weaknesses, because I can't see how many just think this is the cat's meow, this is wonderful, and there's no problems. And if you say there's a problem, you're not a believer. And what I'm trying to do is just warn that, help folks understand, when let's pick rough numbers. When 10% show up at caucus meeting versus, let's say, 50% who vote, and they feel like there's a disconnect, and therefore the delegates didn't really represent their perspective, we need to look and say, okay, what is going on with the delegate selection process, the delegate engagement process, the voter engagement process? Where's that disconnect? What's the cause of the disconnect? When it looks like if their job is to represent the platform, how do we help make sure delegates are fully engaged, understand the platform, what are the weaknesses with that, and so forth? And we need to work through that process. The other thing we also need to look at is ask yourself, why would a guy like me gather signatures this year when I've been so opposed to it for so long? And you mentioned some of the strategy and games being played. I looked and I said, okay, I probably have the best name ID of anybody entering this race.
Sure.
Well, therefore, there are folks that they will play games not to have the one or two best, strongest candidates come out, but they want the weakest candidates to come out because they're already on the primary ballot and they don't want strong opposition. So I thought that game is going to get potentially played against me.
Yeah.
Well, I need to buttress against that issue. And so this is, but I ran into delegates, and to me, delegates were like, oh, you got signatures, I'm voting against you. And it's like, okay, that's not in the platform per se. And
right.
And sure, you
can is that strategy thing. Yeah.
Is that really in the best interest of the caucus convention system? I would say if you're voting against somebody solely because of that, then you're missing the mark. But I'm just trying to say, if we want to keep the caucus convention system, we have to look to say, how do we engage people better? And how do we help folks be better informed and recognize the weaknesses rather than just, I hear they're better informed, they're more engaged and so forth. And maybe on average, yes. But on the spectrum, I think people read that to be, they're like 99% engaged and informed, and that's not where we're sitting.
Yeah, and I think there's a true statement that on average, yes. But I also agree, and I really appreciate what you said, that the fact that we criticize the system simply means that we are looking for ways to make it better. It doesn't mean that we should throw out the baby with the bathwater. So we should always be having some introspection and saying, well, how could we be doing this better? What do we need to change about our party? What do we need to change about the process? What do we need to change about our attitude? What do we need to change about how we go about this thing? Because it needs to evolve. And we've been very slow, admittedly, as a party. We've been glacially slow to evolve our process to absorb the reality of SB 54. I think for several years we were just hoping it would go away. And we were just assuming it was gonna, we would go to the Supreme Court and they would strike it down for us. But we have to get, we have to do all the things that you've said. I don't disagree with that.
But why won't it go away right now?
Oh, it won't go away because it can't go away. Because if SB 54 was struck down, then we would immediately have the same group of wealthy and famous people start a referendum process to eliminate the caucus and convention system. So we still need it as our training wheels.
And our Republican members think that the caucus convention system is not representative of them.
And
it makes both of those together.
That's right. That's why the referendum process would succeed, is because we still have
initiative process. But
that's right, the initiative process. Thank you very much. Yeah, you know all the right words because you're the
referendum is the I don't like what the legislature did.
Yes.
Shut it down, veto it. Initiative is I want to change a law. Yes.
Yes. So yes, we have to as in any organization to thrive, we have to be able to see our weaknesses. We have to be able to address those. I've laid out some ways here. I know we're coming up on an hour and I don't want to bore people. Why don't I suggest this? Why don't I kind of do a wrap up and then you give a wrap up and we'll call it a day? Because we could go on like this all day, John. I really enjoy talking to you and you're a very smart guy. And I think you're an astute observer of politics. So I think the key is that, yes, I think we recognize the weaknesses that you have aptly and correctly pointed out. We're working hard as a party to address those. It's a cultural change. It's a strategic change. It's not going to be an overnight thing. It's a cultural change for our electorate. We have to be way more involved in teaching and explaining as a party what the process is for. That's the reason for this podcast. This is why we're having this discussion, so that we can get this out and help people to understand it. There will always be people who aren't engaged and they won't care. That's fine. That's their right to do. But I think we always have to look at when we are talking about a political system or any kind of a process, we always have to ask, as our good chair, Christy Hanshaw, does, compared to what? Compared to what? So which is a better engagement? Somebody going to a caucus meeting, getting elected, talking to candidates, or signing a petition at the door? I actually have a friend who got 100 people to sign a petition that said, I'm an idiot for not reading this petition before signing it. It's so easy to get names on a petition. It is not a representative of the party or anything. It's engagement. That is the key, and we have to continue to improve it. But I believe that right now, as we stand, the caucus system is the counterbalance. It's not a predictor of the primary. It's the counterbalance to money and fame. And I think if we look at the amount of money spent in the primaries, in every case, now in Utah County, 20 out of 21 of our convention nominees was elected in the primary. 20 out of 20 and 21. At the state, we're 2 out of 6. But at the state level, the amount of money spent, our candidates, our nominees, were outspent by factors of 2.5 to 1, of 2 to 1. I've even seen reports of higher than that. And so, are we counterbalancing? Yes. Can we do a better job? Yes. And I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss these ideas with you, John.
Sure. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss as well. I'm going to just flag, just in closing, 2 quick things. One, our founders warned us about factions. And right now, caucus convention system is too subject to factions, small factions here or there taking control. And we need to strengthen the process to ensure that we're checking, faction against faction, to make sure that we don't have small factions running roughshod over the process. And 2, we need to have greater humility, recognizing, as you said, we're a business, we're a corporation. We're, part of the job you're doing there is to pitch yourself to your customers, to your members. And we have done a poor job of that. And we need greater humility, recognizing the weaknesses in our system. And if we really want to preserve it, we need to look and say, where are the weaknesses and how do we go about fixing those? Because when we pat ourselves on the back and say the delegates are more informed and they're more engaged, well, compared to what, doesn't necessarily mean that meets the level of what we're saying. And if there's a disconnect between the delegates and the electorate, whose fault is that?
Well said.
We need to discuss that. So thank you so much. Really appreciate the invitation.
Likewise.
Yeah, this was really fascinating. I didn't want to jump in because you guys were making very interesting points. So thanks again for coming. John Dougall, state auditor, former candidate for Congressional District 3, and Kirby Glad, who is the secretary of the Utah County Republican Party. I just want to encourage people before we wrap up, go check out our website. It's ucrp.org. And yeah, come engage with us now. I mean, we're kind of past the primary, we're past the caucus, what we're talking about here, but we are gearing up for more stuff to represent our platform, and we are always looking for ways to bring people in and have you be involved. So thanks again, guys. Until next time, Max out.